Hello and welcome to Business 360. I'm Ashmit Kumar. Here are the headlines that we're tracking this evening. GST rates kick in from today. Prices of kitchen staples, medicines, electronics, automobiles and others get cheaper. Prime Minister Modi bets on tax cuts, accelerating growth and result in savings of 2.5 lakh crore rupees. Stock market slide in late trade. Sensex loses over 450 points. Nifty clings on to 25,200. Mid-caps see sharper cuts compared to the blue chips. IT stocks tumble after US imposes a $100,000 fee on H-1B visas widely used by Indian nationals. Trump administration clarifies that the fee is a one-time payment and applies only on new applicants. Several companies hint at limited impact, but concerns on margins and growth linger. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal in Washington for trade talks weeks after the conciliatory statements from Trump. Chief negotiator Rajesh Agarwal also accompanying the minister. Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar scheduled to meet his American counterpart Marco Rubio in New York ahead of the United Nations General Assembly. India's GDP growth will be near 7% this year after the GST cuts, as Chief Economic Advisor Anantha Nageswaran expects revenue growth to remain on track and is confident of achieving 4.4% fiscal deficit target. That's an exclusive. Government is hopeful of exceeding the divestment target, says DPAM Secretary Arunish Chawla. Also expects dividend from PSUs to exceed 1.2 lakh crore rupees mopped up last year. Says 12 strategic divestments and listings of some PSUs are on the cards. That's another exclusive. United Kingdom, Canada and Australia, part of the G7 grouping, formally recognized Palestine's statehood ahead of the annual United Nations General Assembly. France likely to follow suit, along with nations including Belgium, Malta and New Zealand. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu responds saying there will be no Palestinian state west of the Jordanian River. Well, the top story this evening, the Trump administration has clarified that the $100,000 H-1B visa fee is a one-time charge and will apply only on new applicants. This category of visas are used primarily by Indian workers in the tech and the IT sectors. The move sent shockwaves across the industry as the significant escalation in cost effectively makes these visas economically unviable. Currently, H-1B visas cost anywhere between $1,700 and $4,500. Shares of top 4 tech giants, including Infosys, TCS, HCL Tech and Wipro, took a beating in trade. The 4 companies cumulatively lost market cap worth 65,000 crore rupees. President Trump signed the executive order last Friday in the presence of Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Lutnick put it rather bluntly, urging tech companies to, and I quote, train Americans, stop bringing in people to take our jobs, end of quote. Indians are the overwhelming beneficiaries of the H-1B visas. More than 71% of the visas were granted to Indian nationals last year. China ranks a distant second with just 12%. NASSCOM has said that the clarification on fee eases immediate concerns for Indian tech professionals, adding that the Indian tech industry now has the time to enhance local skilling and hiring in the United States. Among companies, Amazon has more than 10,000 employees on H-1B visas. According to US government data, TCS is second with over 5,500 visa holders, followed by Microsoft, Meta and Apple. This data is as of June of 2025. The American depository receipts of Infosys and Wipro tumbled in trade after Trump's proclamation. Meanwhile, India and the United States are looking to intensify trade talks. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal is in Washington, D.C. for the next round of trade talks. This comes after US removed sanctions waiver on Chabar port in Iran, which was being developed by India, as well as the H-1B fee hike that we saw over the weekend. Meanwhile, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar will be meeting US Secretary of State Marco Rubio in New York for the bilateral discussion. That's just a day ahead of the UN General Assembly summit kicking in. Well, for more on the H-1B issue, let me now go across to Shereen Bhan, who is joined by Rajesh Nambiar, the president of the IT industry body NASSCOM. Shereen, over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Ashmit. This has been the big story over the weekend and it continues to play out. Joining us now for the first reaction from industry body NASSCOM is the president, Rajesh Nambiar. Rajesh, thanks very much for joining us. I would imagine it's been nothing short of a nightmarish weekend for the IT industry, for industry associations like NASSCOM. I know you've put out a revised statement now on the back of the clarifications that have come in from the White House, but nevertheless, Rajesh, on the back of things as they currently exist, does it make the H-1B route unviable for Indian IT?
So, first of all, thank you, Shereen, for having me in the show. Wonderful to be here as always. Look, you're right. I mean, I think we did have a fairly difficult weekend. But, coming back to H-1B, as you know, over the years, I think most of the IT companies, IT services company, IT tech companies have reduced the dependency on H-1B over a period of time. So that, which means that today we are looking at a much smaller issue compared to what we would have probably looked at maybe 4 years ago or 5 years ago. And as you saw, and then your channel reported as well, because of the clarification which was issued by the White House, of course, I wish they'd actually did not do a separate clarification. They should have probably sent it with the initial executive order itself. But that has clarified a lot of issues, for the people who are outside of the United States, who are H-1B visa holders. So it clarified a lot of other technical issues that we've been grappling with. But good news is that this comes into effect only from the next year, which is 2026, new set of visas. So there's a little bit of a breather for companies to sort of enhance the skilling options that we have, hire people from the local. In the US itself, I think there'll be a lot of hiring which will now happen. So I think broadly, while we will have some impact, but it wasn't the kind of the impact that we thought when the executive order came out first.
Well, yes, the worst case scenario perhaps has been averted on the back of those clarifications that came out, Rajesh. But, to the point that you made about the dependence having decreased significantly in the last few years, let's just look at the last year's lottery. How much of the H-1B offtake was to Indian IT companies? I know that US Tech has been a large recipient of the H-1B visas, but if you can break down for us in numbers, on the back of the last lottery, which is for 2025, how much went to Indian IT services companies?
So, Shereen, as you know, the H-1B is roughly about 85,000 visas, 20,000 reserved for a special category, so 65,000, out of which tech itself will be about, 90% of that. So it's just, it comes down further down. And then Indian share itself is a little lower than that. But, majority of it is actually from the Indian professionals. So from the last lottery, if you go back and look at from the Indian origin companies, because there are also companies which might have headquartered elsewhere, but, clearly Indian origin in many ways. So those were the companies, had roughly about 15,000 or so, which was issued in 2025. This was much lower compared to what it used to be. So we came down 30% over the last 5-6 years in terms of the number of H-1Bs, applied by these organizations. So it is now, not for every company, and you put some numbers out there as well. While these are applications which have been sanctioned, remember, not everybody who's gotten H-1B from these companies are also traveling, because some people have left the organization in the meanwhile. They may not have the right requirement for some of them to travel. So there is a lot of things goes on between these numbers. But I do believe that this is a much smaller number that we are staring at today than ever before. Now, with this 100,000 fee that you're going to have, you're going to find these numbers coming down even further. So now we'll be a lot more thoughtful in terms of what numbers that we would probably apply as an industry as well.
Talking about applying judiciously, given the fact that you're now going to have to deal with $100,000 price tag for every petition filed, does this price out the small cap, mid cap IT companies? Does this largely then remain in the realm of the 4 or 5 big tech Indian IT services companies?
Well, the good news is that most of them have option to sort of really do a local hiring, and which is, I think, some of them, even both the mid-tech companies, mid-tier tech companies, as well as some of the small companies have begun to sort of do some local hiring as well. So H-1B is not the only route that they need to work on. But certainly, I think we do believe that blocking this route is actually not a very good option for some of them. But let's also understand that the H-1B workers are actually a small percentage of the overall US workforce. And, in most cases, it's a very small percentage of the total workforce that any of these companies have, the mid-tier tech companies, as well as the large tech companies. So it's a small number to begin with. And, there are other options available for people to work on as well. But it is certainly, without a question, as you rightly said, especially for some of the smaller organizations, these costs will be a little bit prohibitive. But, the good news is that initially it was annual and we were a little concerned about that. But now it is clarified that it's a one-time fee, which means that you're taking that and then proportioning it around 6 years. So the real impact on some of this is a lot more, smaller than what we thought initially.
I want to go back to the point that you made that companies are now going to hire locally as opposed to taking people on H-1Bs. Now, if you had the ability to hire locally, why would you use the H-1B route unless there was a significant cost arbitrage involved? So what happens now if you're going to be hiring locally and the cost arbitrage is done away with? The impact on margins as we move forward, Rajesh, we've already seen margins being under pressure. What could this mean now in terms of growth going forward?
No, broadly, H-1Bs are not necessarily only for arbitrage alone, because there is arbitrage certainly in the offshore component of what we do for the services companies, Shereen. But the on-site movement with the H-1B did not have much of an arbitrage. Of course, they're also paid. If you go back and look at the average wages paid to these workers by the organizations, most of the large organizations, there's a big difference in terms of local hiring and this as well. There was, of course, a little bit of a difference, but the bigger challenge for us would have been availability of talent, making sure that they are trained well. If somebody is going from a certain project in offshore, going on site to make sure that their continuation of what they've learned in the project within their offshore country. So there are a lot of issues related to also talent mobility, if you may, right? People who are going there to lead a certain piece of it. All of that was also important, from that point of view. Now, local hiring will certainly have a little bit of an impact, from a margin point of view, but it is not a huge impact as far as these companies are concerned. And I also believe that the $100,000 now you have to add from next year onwards, that will also have a minimal impact on the margins. But the question is, instead of saying margin, I want to say cost. The reason is that some of this cost will actually be passed on to the end consumers or end customers of these organizations, which means that there may not be a margin impact at all on these companies, because if you're able to pass it on as a cost to these companies and then include it in the pricing.
You talked about customers and clients, Rajesh. Any feedback coming in, initial feedback coming in from clients and customers? What has this done to confidence? What has this done to sentiment? We saw over the weekend several reports suggesting that there was guidance given out by many companies telling people who are on H-1B visas not to travel if they're outside of the US, to return to the US. And we saw that panic play out in terms of ticket prices for certain. Does that guidance still hold despite the clarification? And what's the overall mood, the sentiment that you're picking up on from clients and customers at this point in time?
So first of all, those guidance were issued when we did not have the clarification, which was issued by the White House later on after about a day or two. So that all of that in terms of not traveling, all of that goes away, because now there is no restriction on people who already own a H-1B to travel, which means that even though you are outside of the country, you can still get back to the country. If you're in the country, you can travel outside, etc. From our customers and our clients who are, global in nature, of course, a significant percentage of our business, as you know, 63% of what we do from Indian tech industry, relies on the US customer base. They've been quiet. I must say that, most of them have certainly quietly supported us. I think they're a little bit reticent to come back and openly and say a lot of things in the media or any of that. But they've been very supportive. I don't think we have had any issues where they've had a panic reaction to this, and they do know that if the clarification hadn't come through, it would have been a lot more personal difficulty for people who have traveled outside. There were people who are going out for weddings. They got panicky. And then, as you saw some of the videos, they got out of the plane because they couldn't travel. All of that confusion was probably unnecessary at this point in time. And I wish, I think, clarification had come a little sooner. But we are where we are, and then I think when we look forward, we have another year or so to sort of work on what really this means to all of the companies. And I've spoken to many of the organizations. I think we're very confident in terms of how we will handle this. At the same time, let's also not minimize the impact such orders have on our broader business. So it's kind of balanced approach. I think we understand the impact, but at the same time we need to work on what is needed at this moment for the industry.
Well, speaking about sentiment, and there's enough on the plate at the moment, but, the larger messaging and signaling that this move sends out is that it's no longer goods. The battle has moved beyond goods now to services, and this perhaps is the first salvo, so to speak. We don't know what will eventually happen to the Hire Act because it is akin to a private member's bill, so there's a long way for it to go before it becomes into any kind of law. But is there concern building within industry that this is the first salvo in a new front, so to speak?
Well, there are two issues that you mentioned here. One is tariffs, and the other one is, of course, the Hire Act or Hire Bill. I don't want to call it Act. Even though a lot of people call it an Act, I want to call it a Hire Bill because until it becomes an Act, it's still a bill. It has to go through a lot of hoops before it gets into an Act. On the tariff side, as you know, as of today, the tariffs are still on goods, not on services. So, most of what is happening is around speculation, and the most of the speculation is actually coming not from the administration, but from others, tweeting or probably related to the administration in some sense. But so we wouldn't give too much of credence around tariffs on services as yet. While we will be prepared, we will make sure that there are enough work which is being done in terms of addressing what we need to do if there are tariffs. The second element is Hire Bill, right? And this is, of course, as most of you know, promoted by a senator, and has presented it. The good news is that we already got a block by the Democrats on the bill, so which means that it hasn't gone through the process as yet. But that doesn't mean that it will go away anytime soon. You will have to watch carefully as to what it means to us in the longer duration, and we will wait and watch as to what it means to some of us. But if you see what is really going on is there's both ways, right? At one end, there are jobs in America, the higher visa fee, etc., or the $100,000 that we put on it will make sure that there aren't too many people who are taking those jobs away. And the Hire Act is sort of aimed at saying that there aren't too many jobs that are going out as well. So it is sort of a double whammy in some ways. But we will wait and watch. Yeah. I mean, at this point in time, we want to be taking a very balanced view on what Hire Act is. I doubt whether this will see the light of the day, given that it has to go through a lot of hoops, and then 60% approval from the Senate before it becomes an act.
Well, yes, as I pointed out, it is a long distance before it becomes an act or legislation. But Rajesh, on the tariffs, there is now, of course, the matter is pending before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court in the U.S. is going to take this up. The appeals court has ruled against the imposition of tariffs. Is there any conversation around mounting a legal challenge on the H-1B changes that have been moved?
No, look, that would be the last option anybody want to sort of consider at this point in time. I think there are many things that we do as an industry. I think we will be committing to making sure that we do this right, which means that we highlight on the amount of jobs this industry is creating in the United States, the amount of training that this industry is doing. We have trained close to 1 million people within the ecosystem within the United States. We are one of the biggest training provider within some of the artificial intelligence and related topics within the United States. In some of the pockets that we've been addressing, we roughly employ about 210,000 people in the United States. So there's a lot of good things which is happening. We just want to make sure that we are able to consolidate it. Our narrative is going to be very different, and we want to make sure that we are truly doing this in a very balanced way. I mean, litigation would probably be the last thing that we want to talk about. Of course, the option is always there. Again, we would not front end anything like that, but I think we would take other options to make sure that we are able to do that as well if it comes through.
You know, Rajesh, you talked about the good stories, and the silver lining really for the IT business has been the GCC business, which has flourished. We've seen, of course, the significant growth and rise of GCCs operating in India. Now, many people suggesting, including industry veterans of the IT services sector, that this is in fact going to move more jobs and more work and more business to GCC, so this may not be as negative a hit as is being imagined or expected. What's your take on that?
Well, we can always look at it positively, right? And I think that's the right way to look at some of this. GCC has been a phenomenal story. Shireen, you have written about it. You have spoken about it multiple times. We've been, advocating this for the last many years. It's certainly the brightest star, if you may. Today, as of now, we have 1750 GCCs in India, growing at a much faster clip. The revenues have grown up to $65 billion in FY25. The GCCs together employ about 1.9 million people as of today. So, and we've also said that by 2030, this number is going to be much larger, right? It's going to be, upwards of 2,100 or so, which basically means that every week or so, we have 1 or 2 GCCs setting up shop, which means roughly about 90 to 100 in a year is what we are saying. This growth will continue. There is no question. Of course, no on services. We spoke about taxation on offshore. Some of these moves we never know as to where this is going to lead to. But I do believe that if we stay focused on true value addition, as you know, GCCs have moved away from truly focusing only on cost arbitrage. Now it's all about innovation. It's all about how much revenue impact that they're having on the parent companies as opposed to only saving costs. So I think we've come a long way in the GCC journey, and I'm very positive that this will continue to be the case as we move forward.
Well, Rajesh, that brings me then to the final question, which is something that's been up for debate now for very long, whether Indian IT services finds itself at an inflection point yet again, and whether this is in fact an existential crisis for the current business model. And I think the criticism has been that Indian IT hasn't done enough to move up the value chain, to do enough on innovation, and perhaps has spent too much of its capital on buybacks and such like. How do you respond to that criticism? And do you believe that this is, in fact, an existential moment for India's IT services sector yet again?
Not at all, Shireen. I don't think this is an existential crisis at all. By far, I think this technology, this industry has been very resilient to several of these interventions that we have seen in the past. You've seen many of them as well, and I've seen them too. So the enterprise tech spending will continue to be resilient, with certainly budgets, of course, increasingly directed towards AI to unlock value creation. And you also find that, there's a lot more spend now on the newer growth areas, which means that we are pivoting into something very new. Remember, when we're doing all of this, there has also been this whole change in technology with, things moving into generative AI, agentic AI, etc. There's a lot that we do when looking at future of technology. We had sent out a report. I'm not sure how many of you have seen that. Together with McKinsey, in the next 3 to 5 years, agentic AI alone could unlock about $300 to $500 billion in totally new market opportunities. So, are we ready for making sure that we are capturing some of those market opportunities? So, it is important for us to make sure that we are doing all of that. So, there's a lot happening. I don't think it's fair to say that this industry is sort of going through its end phase. Far from it. I'm very bullish about what this industry can offer in the days to come. So I'm looking forward to making sure that we tide over this. Of course, we'll go through a little bit of a pain in the short term. But let's not forget that if you look at a long-term view, not even that long-term, Shireen, look at 3 to 5 years down the line, you're going to find that everything is going to be tech-led, tech-infused, which means that there is need for technology, the need for technologists, including, artificial AI and agentic AI, etc. Ability for us to make that pivot and ensure that we are building sustainable systems is going to be the need of the hour. And there is no question that, the Indian tech industry will come through as a shining star in all of this.
Well, we certainly hope so. But Rajesh, in the short term, can you quantify the impact, the hit on account of the H-1B change, as well as perhaps, just holding back as far as orders are concerned, if at all that were to happen? Is there any kind of an estimate that's been put together?
No, we don't, as NASSCOM, we tend not to give any market estimates, Shereen, as you know. The companies have been working on this. As I mentioned before, one good news is that there is no near-term impact at all. So we're not worried about what happens in the next, 3 or 4 quarters. We do think that in 2026, if this 100,000 stays, there will be an impact from a cost point of view again, right? Because of the fact that even if you're going to be applying for a smaller number of visas, this 100,000 per visa will be a sort of a number. But remember, there are large organizations, so when you take a number like this, spread it across 6 years, then the impact on a yearly basis is going to be very low. There will be a marginal impact on the cost. And again, as I mentioned before, that can be translated into pricing changes and could be passed on to the clients, or that's something which the companies could take it on their margin. So that's something which the individual companies will make those calls. We haven't seen any slowdown or anything on the client side because of this at this point in time. So I don't believe that in the short term there will be any significant impact at this point in time.
Well, Rajesh Nambiar, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. We wish you the very best of luck. Thanks very much for joining us here on CNBC-TV18 to take us through how the Indian IT services sector is coping with the changes announced as far as the H-1B visa regime is concerned, but more importantly, also what the road ahead looks like. It has been a very, very difficult and volatile weekend, but thanks very much for your time. With that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of CNBC-TV18 Special Broadcast Business 360. We'll take a break. The news continues right after this. We're back in a moment.